really great to be here with you all. Never thought I would be in Kosovo, and I'm so happy to explore the city and learn from you all at this amazing conference. And so I wanted to start this session off with some interactive activities in the spirit of the conference. So I want you all to look around this room and yell out an estimate of what percentage of the audience you think are women. What? 40? Any others? 37, 20, 50. Okay, now I need a volunteer who's good at counting. Anyone? Anyone from the staff? How about you? Will you be my volunteer and count the number of women over the course of this talk and put it into a ratio of women to men, a percentage for me by the end of it. So you have 20 minutes to do that, okay? Okay, cool. So I'm Arikia. I think that you may have heard the name before because your national drink is named after me. So I also, in the spirit of drinking, wanted to ask you all if when you go to pubs here, do you ever order a beer and then only drink half of it and leave the other half on the table? Does anyone do that? No? Okay. So if you go to the eye doctor for a checkup and he's examining you, do you stop him when he gets to the second eye and say, no, that's okay, I only need one of them. I don't need to know what my other prescription is. Just give me glasses with one lens. Does anyone do that? No? Okay, me either. How about if you go to an ATM and you withdraw 200 euros? Do you ever leave one of the bills in the ATM? Just leave it there? No? You take all your money. So then, why would you ever put yourself in a position where you're neglecting 50% of the workforce in the world? Because that's what's happening. So, women in this world, in every single sector, are severely underutilized. And we spent a lot of time at this conference already talking about where we're going in the future. If we're going to Mars and outer space, where technology will take us, self-driving cars, all of this. And I have somewhat of a pessimistic view about where all this is heading from what I've seen, because we certainly won't get there as fast, if at all, if we don't begin to use the other 50% of humanity to its full potential. So here's an analogy that I like to use when we talk about where we all come from. This is a 52 card deck, and I like to think that every human being on this planet, when they're born, gets dealt a hand of cards from this deck. And each card can represent a different trait, an inherent trait or an environmental trait. Maybe the traits are race, class, gender is certainly one. Maybe it's how much money your parents had, where you were born, how healthy you are if you were born with some kind of congenital disease. And so, however we get these traits, we each have a different set of them. And it impacts our ability to achieve this thing called success in the world. So this is what I call the ultimate life Trump hand. So these are the characteristics that the people who are dealt them have the best chances at reaching success. If you're white, male, straight, healthy, and born into a wealthy family. So automatically, the people who are dealt this hand of cards have an advantage over almost every other human being in the world. So in order to tell this story, I'm going to tell you a bit about my hand of cards that I was dealt. I'm a woman, which is a negative in the life game. I'm a minority. My father's Haitian, which is a little island in the Caribbean. There was an earthquake there recently, you may have heard about it. It's a severely impoverished country, so I grew up with only one parent. My mother raised me. But I have a few things working to my advantage, so, you know, it's not the worst hand in the world. Certainly could have been, you know, a pair of twos or nothing at all. I was born in the United States, which gave me access to free education until I was 18, and a passport that can take me to all kinds of countries in the world that people who don't have a US passport can go to. And I'm pretty fucking smart, I'll say so. I had my IQ tested when I was 11, and I was a couple points away from genius, but I still remember the question that I got marked down on, and that was asking me to define democracy as an 11-year-old, as what is the government in your country? And I don't think they liked the answer that I said, so they gave me a bad mark on that one, so maybe I'm a genius. So the only thing that we can do in life is play our deck of cards. And I did. I studied really hard all through school, focusing on math and science, because I knew that I wanted to work in biomedical technologies. I was fascinated by it ever since I heard of it. Stem cell research and cancer therapies and things to extend human life. So I got straight A's all through high school. Got accepted into a top engineering college in the University of Michigan in the United States. And I went ready to solve problems related to human disease. And I was working in a radiation oncology lab when I was 18, 19. And then something happened in my education that prevented me from continuing. And I think it's a time when a lot of women drop off in this field. And what happened was that I got stalked by a fellow classmate or someone. I never found out who it was, which really scared me, made me not want to go to class, general paranoias. And so after recovering from that, then I encountered some sexual harassment from one of my professors in my computer science course. So I took my whole life's education at that point and threw it in the garbage and started over in journalism because it wasn't worth my mental health. And so, again, we can only play the deck of cards that were handed. So I carried on and thought that if I couldn't, you know, work towards curing cancer, then I would at least write about it and write about the people who could. So I went on to do a variety of other things. I got my diploma. I moved to New York right after I graduated and started moving up the chain in the world of journalism. But I still wonder from time to time what would have happened if I'd been dealt another deck of cards where I could have continued my field of interest. Maybe I would be finding the cures for disease that are going to kill thousands of people in this world. So I wound up at Wired magazine. At the time, it was my dream job in the industry. And I was getting a lot of feedback from my peers in the science community, which is where I started out, because Wired was making some interesting decisions with regard to its content. And these headlines kept popping up. Wired is alienating women. They were putting breasts on their cover unnecessarily, objectifying women. And so I went to the higher-ups there and said, hey, let me help you with this problem that you have. let me start a section that will appeal directly to women, to this sector of your audience that you're sorely neglecting. And they said, we don't have a woman problem. And anyway, women don't read Wired. The marketing team actually thinks that their target demographic is a 30-something-year-old wealthy male. And so, as a writer, that's how I was expected to write and who I was expected to write to. And so they said, you know, I kept pitching my idea, and they said, well, if you want to do this thing, why don't you just start it yourself as a side project? And maybe someday we'll buy it. And I said, actually, I'm going to do it as my full-time project, and maybe you won't be able to afford it. So that's when I created LadyBits. And I basically went around to everyone I knew in the media world who was encountering the same problems I was, where they were existing in these kind of patriarchal media structures where they were pitching things to their editors. They had ideas about what they wanted to write about, and the ideas were getting rejected. Oh no, that's not the right fit for us. Nobody will read it. It won't be interesting. So and so. And so it was pretty easy to go around and scoop up the most talented, underutilized, journalistic, female resources, people writing about science and technology and all kinds of things. And I used my influence that I'd accrued over the years to form partnerships with other publications so that we could get these stories out there. So first, we launched on Medium. It was right when that platform was getting going. And so LadyBits was one of the first 10 paid collections there. Kind of gone downhill since then. Since we left, I mean. But we got some good stories out. Refinery 29 was a publication that started as a women's fashion publication online. And they wanted an expansion of tech coverage. So we swooped in and said, sure, let us tell you about technology. In Popular Science, we got to highlight some scientific minds that didn't have a publishing outlet because science is a very male-dominated profession and nobody was writing about things that specifically appealed to women. So we took care of that. And finally, we partnered with Vice Motherboard, their technology section, and have been putting out articles about medicine and health in a series called Bodies of the Future. And so we're still doing that today. And I think in the course of 2 years, the group of writers that I assembled, about 100 of them, mostly New York based, but internationally, people in Australia, Pakistan, England, we published over 250 articles with no investment. The only resources that we had coming in were from the publications that wanted more female bylines in their publications. So I'm pretty proud of that. Thanks. So back to this issue of gender equality. Why do we even want it? I mean, everyone talks about it. We should have a 50-50 balance in workplaces, but what does that really do? I mean, some people think that men are just smarter than women. Some people think that women aren't good at technology. They don't understand science. And I think that's all kind of bullshit. And actually, the research really backs it up. There's a number of studies that show they put people together in different groups and measured the productivity of the group. And the most productive groups of people across professions were the ones that had as close to a 50-50 gender balance as possible. So how do we get there? Well, you can't cure cancer if you can't read. So there's major problems with regard to that. Out of the population of illiterate people, most of them are women. Out of the population of impoverished people, most of them are women. But if you look in a place like New York, where the workforce itself is 50-50, when you look at the technological sectors, that number drops off drastically. It's 70-30, just about. Only 25% of the people in computer professions are women. This is an interesting study about classrooms. So what if we can teach our kids to, what if we can create the gender balance in youth? So they controlled in classrooms for participation. So the teachers would randomly call on students, male, female, so that it was exactly 50%. And then they surveyed the teachers about how often they thought they were calling on students. And in science, one of the teachers said that he perceived that he was calling on female students 90% of the time, when in actuality he was only calling on them 50% of the time. And the male students in the class complained, oh, the girls are getting all of the talk time, when really it was even. Because people are so used to seeing women sit there silently while the men speak. So it's really all about perception. We've grown up seeing all of these examples in the world, films, our role models in technological and scientific sectors being very male-dominated. So here's 2 clips from some more interesting studies. In adults, if there's an equal gender balance in the room, if there's 17% women in the room, men will think that it's 50-50. And if there's 33%, then men think that they're in the minority. The same goes for talkativeness. Men perceive women to be talking so much more. And this Australian feminist theorist came up with the idea that perhaps that's because the standard that people are comparing isn't men and women talking, it's comparing women to silence, because they're so accustomed to women sitting there silent. So, why is this happening? And what can we do to change it? So, even though we have our fancy computers and all of our technology, we're still in a situation where we're using our monkey brains to make decisions. Evolution is a slow process, and we haven't come very far. And still, subconsciously, when we walk into a room, we're thinking about 2 things, primarily: mating and threats. Who's gonna kill us, and who do we wanna have sex with? He agrees. So, I don't know if I can talk over this. Okay, so this is what it feels like sometimes in the workplace, being the only woman in the room. If you're there and everyone's thinking about, things that are not work-related, then it can be very alienating. There are lots of complaints about the low rates of women in workplaces, but when situations like this are going on, it's not a very conducive atmosphere to work. Then there's this other phenomenon that people have hypothesized is really causing the problem, called queen bee syndrome, which is when women who do get to be in senior roles then kind of kick the younger women out of the way because they feel threatened. This was a very popular idea in the 70s, Columbia just did a study on it with a huge cohort of people and disproved it, said it was a myth, and that the reason why women are not escalating into the top tiers of professional environments is because of the male structures in place at the top that are used to having maybe one woman in a boardroom position. And so they're actively working to keep women in lower positions. But hey, we've reached a new record at Fortune 500 companies, historic high. We now have 4.8% women in top CEO roles instead of 3 5 years ago. Wow. So what can we do? Well, in physics, when you're looking at balances and scales, if you want the scale to be equal, and you can't change the weight on either side, you have to move the fulcrum. So what that means, like, with respect to what I did at LadyBits, I formed a smaller community. We proved our talent to the larger community and formed partnerships to get our content out there. That's one thing we can do. Here's one of my favorite examples. This woman was working at a creative agency, and her boss had this poster on the wall. And every time she would go to work, she would see this picture of a woman being pretty objectified. And she got sick of it. It wasn't the environment that she wanted to walk into every day. So before her boss came to work one day, she replaced it with this poster that she made. And at first he got, he was yelling in his office, and she was really scared. But then he laughed about it and was like, okay, I was being an asshole. Like, you made your point. Going back to the theme of space travel, this is one of my favorite studies of all time. I've always wanted to incorporate this in a presentation, and I know I'm running out of time, but it's almost over. So this is a study, more of like a recommendation research analysis about what are we going to do when we go to Mars? Because if men and women are on the spacecraft together, they're going to have sex at some point. So what happens? They look at the classic case of the 3 astronaut, like the love triangle, where the alpha astronaut was having sex with 2 other ones, and they got jealous, and one of them like drove for miles wearing a diaper to go kill the other one. Anyone remember that? Okay, so they've got some recommendations about how to handle space travel that I think can be applied to technological workplaces. One is to fly in separate spacecrafts. Maybe not the most practical solution, but I mean, if you look at a place like Iceland, they separate kids by genders for a few years so the girls can build up their confidence in speaking and answering questions in class so that the boys don't overshadow them at this certain age. This text is kind of cut off, sorry, but I'll try to put it back together for you. Women and men are sexual beings. The likelihood is male and female astronauts traveling in the same spacecraft will have sex during long-duration spaceflight to Mars and after they arrive on Mars, even if substantial measures and steps are taken to prevent it. Therefore, training and preparations must be taken to anticipate all possible consequences and to repair, guide, and modulate sexual activity, not for the purpose of preventing sex, but to prevent catastrophe. So the point of this is we have to be aware of the biases that we're exhibiting, maybe without even realizing it in workplaces. How are we preventing women from entering our work environments and excelling there? And once we start thinking about that, like think about it every day, we have to act. We can't just sit back and allow women to keep being outside of the equation. We have to include them in and make the place welcoming for everyone, because if we don't, we're not going to go to Mars. We're not going to cure cancer. We're going to be stuck in the same unproductive places that have been holding humanity back for thousands of years. Thank you.